The younger generation runs on Disney, which is why it's so important for these movies to be filled with inspiring plots.
Change is good.
Yeah, but it's not easy.
Nevertheless, there have been times when Disney flew too close to the sun and got burnt. Watch until the end to find out which Disney movie got canceled due to being loaded with unforgiving and extremely mature jokes. Don Quixote. It's no secret that Disney loves a challenge, but you know what they don't love? A scandal. So after trying to turn the novel Don Quixote into a cinematic experience for the 4th time, Disney chose to put this project to rest for good.
My point exactly.
So why didn't this novel ever make it to the big screen? Well, its themes were deemed too adult for Disney to explore. And since some parents would opt against letting their kids watch the film, it was just too risky to pursue.
I never thought being a parent could be this much fun.
The ancient fairy tale was written by Miguel de Cervantes in 1605. It came in 2 parts, and the second one was written in 1615. Although fictional, this book had a certain amount of truth to it, which shed light on events that occurred in the 14th century. For this reason, many believe Don Quixote to be a real person. The book introduces us to Alonso Quijano, who is a 50-year-old man who reads too much and sleeps too little. He's known for his dry and risky humor and is often reprimanded for reading too much. Alonso is so fascinated with the stories he reads that he embarks on a quest to become like his heroes. He changes his name to Don Quixote, pretends to be in a relationship with a neighboring farm girl, and proceeds to live out his delusions. Although this movie would have been interesting, it's riddled with inappropriate themes, some of which border on mental health and underage relationships. So by default, it was simply too risky for Disney to take on. Reynard. For decades, Disney struggled to make light of the dark and twisted storylines that encouraged them to create movies like Chanticleer and Reynard. The movie Reynard was based on an old folktale which revolved around a conniving fox who loved to play tricks on people. At first, Disney tried to fuse both movies together to allow their character Reynard to see the light of day. However, the merging fell flat, and both projects were later dropped due to their characters being a little too violent. These movies were in development throughout the 40s and 50s, however, Walt Disney himself would soon pull the plug. He chose to scrap these projects due to Reynard's unpredictable nature. You see, although Reynard was funny and enjoyed playing pranks on those around him, his victims usually wound up severely hurt or worse, gone for good. Although they want to paint the character in a different light, the old folktale reminded them that Reynard just wasn't a good protagonist. So the movie was canceled due to its dark roots. Luckily, their work wasn't all for naught, as Reynard paved the path for the beloved character Robin Hood.
Gee whiz, it's Robin Hood!
So Disney animators and writers soon set their sights on creating a fox-themed character who had a pesky nature but a wholesome heart. If you thought Reynard was controversial, wait until you hear about the movie Wildlife. The reason why this movie was canceled is so shocking you might have to catch your jaw before it hits the ground. The Seven Dwarfs. Walt Disney Studios released their very first feature-length animated film in 1938. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a major hit, which is why Disney planned on continuing the franchise. Decades later, in the early 2000s, Disney Toon Studios sought to pick up where their founder left off. They began animating a prequel titled The Seven Dwarfs. This movie was meant to give the dwarfs a backstory and explain how they came to live together in harmony. With this stellar idea in mind, director Mike Disa and screenwriter Evan Spilatopoulos joined forces and began tackling the project. Although the movie would have primarily focused on the dwarfs, it would also explain how the evil queen managed to take Snow White's father's throne. Their idea was met by a positive response, and the duo was given creative freedom over the project. Oddly enough, the film was later canceled in 2006. So why did Disney drop such a promising project? Well, it turns out that the movie was simply too dark and traumatizing for its target audience. According to Mike Disa, Disney Toon management soon changed their tune and began tweaking their original idea. They wanted the movie to focus on how Dopey lost his voice. However, the reason behind Dopey's muteness was said to be the result of witnessing his mother's tragic passing. Now, if that isn't traumatizing, we don't know what is. Since Disney Toon was fixated on this unfortunate plot, Mike Disa soon dropped out of the project, citing creative differences. Soon after, in 2006, Disney purchased Pixar and existing projects were put under the scope. So, for obvious reasons, the newly appointed Chief Creative Officer John Lasseter chose to pull the plug on the Seven Dwarfs. Mort. They say that when one door closes, another opens, and whoever they are, they sure do make a lot of sense.
Impossible.
Take Disney's Moana, for instance. If it hadn't been for Mort's cancellation, we might not have seen the Polynesian princess come to life. Around 2010, Disney set their sights on a movie titled Mort, which translates to death in French. But this is no mere coincidence, as the Grim Reaper was set to be a starring role. For obvious reasons, this rubbed Disney the wrong way. Disney higher-ups were skeptical about releasing a kids' movie that held such a terminal theme. However, this wasn't the only reason the movie was pulled, as Disney had issues acquiring the rights to Terry Pratchett's Discworld novel, which the movie was modeled after. If the film had been published, we would have met a young man named Mort, who would be chosen to become Death's apprentice. We would see him get trained by the Grim Reaper and take on his first solo assignment. However, Mort would soon fall in love with a princess whose life he was meant to collect. And despite his training, he would save her from her fate, which would threaten the balance of the world. Since this animated film was set in a dark and terrifying landscape, there was no way of knowing if the movie would be a hit or a miss. So the project was soon canceled. The movie's directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, went on to create Moana, which quickly became a fan favorite. And although we love Moana, we have to admit that Mort sounds intriguing. However, it might be a better project for filmmaker Tim Burton to take on. The Shadow King. It looks like it's not the first time Disney took on a darkly themed project only to drop it out of the blue. After all, The Shadow King and Mort seem to have met a similar fate. However, when it comes to The Shadow King, it's safe to say that it was a bigger disappointment than any other canceled film. After all, it did get the boot after costing Disney $50 million to create. The Shadow King was written by Henry Selick, who famously directed the movie Coraline. Disney backed out of the deal when they determined that the movie would cost too much to make. The Shadow King was about a New York orphan named Hap. He had long and strange fingers that derived from a cruel world. His deformation often caused him to be alienated, which led him to become lonely and sad. He would soon meet a living shadow girl who would go on to teach him that his bizarre fingers cast beautiful shadows. However, they could also be used as shadowy weapons. Although this movie is different and entertaining, the shadow monster was terrifying and could potentially scare children. After all, he wanted to feast on a little boy, which is absolutely horrifying. Knowing this, we're not surprised that Disney opted out. The Gremlins. Most of us are familiar with the movie Gremlins, which was released in 1984. However, did you know that Disney once wanted to release a film with the same name? The Gremlins was created by Disney and Roald Dahl, who sought to release the film in the mid-1940s. Despite writing 2 screenplays and spending a lot of time and energy on the project, Disney would later cancel it for a series of reasons.
Hey! What's going on here?
First of all, the movie would have been released in close proximity to the end of World War II. And since the Gremlins were fond of destroying warplanes, it seemed like too much of a risk. So Disney chalked it up to bad timing and insensitivity, and ended up putting the movie on the back burner. However, its concept was soon transformed into a storybook, which went on to sell a lot of copies. In 2008, Dark Horse Comics took on the project and released a comic book miniseries in its honor. So while The Gremlins was never animated by Disney, it did see the light of day. Keep watching to find out which Disney movie was written, directed, and animated only to be canceled by the vice chairman midway through its screening. King of Elves. Disney fans couldn't wait to watch The King of Elves in 2012. Sadly, its release date came and went, and Disney had nothing to show for it. Since the movie's storyline and storybook had been completed, many fans asked themselves why Disney would pull the plug. Well, as it turns out, they had an array of reasons for scrapping the project. The King of Elves was based on Philip K. Dick's short story by the same name. It followed the lives of a troop of elves and a single dwarf living in Mississippi. A human named Calder would go on to become their king after saving them from an evil troll. Disney grew nervous as time went on, as they felt like the movie was far too dark and not merchandise friendly. On top of that, Frozen was slated to be released in 2013, which could halt the movie's revenue. And since the project was taking longer to accomplish, their release dates could have ended up overlapping, which simply wasn't an option. In the end, producer Chuck Williams chose to abandon ship to work on the movie Big Hero 6, which proved to be a big success. The movie was officially shelved in 2009 and has yet to be dusted off and revived. Although the movie might have been deemed too dark for children, we can't help but fall in love with its animation. We mean, just look at those elves. They're super adorable. Wildlife. We've kept the best for last, and by best, we mean worse. Honestly, we can't believe that Disney sought to greenlight this movie, seeing as it was riddled with adult jokes. Wildlife was directed by Howard Baker and Roger Gould, and was developed by the Walt Disney Company in the late 1990s. However, it soon got shelved in 2000. The movie was about a nightclub owner named Red Pitsane who was in dire need of a new star act. To save his club, Red and Kitty start looking for a brand new act, and they come upon Ella, a talking elephant. Problem is, she has low self-esteem and is scared to take the stage. But all that changes one night when Ella gets electrocuted and awakens to believe she's a big star. The movie seemed like a whole lot of fun, which is why it was predicted to be a hoot. However, the Wildlife team embedded some pretty serious jokes into their film. So when the vice chairman of the board, Roy Disney, viewed the presentation reel, he couldn't believe his ears. In fact, he cut the presentation reel short, claiming that he was appalled by its sultry humor. So you might be wondering which joke caused Roy to shut down the production. Well, apparently Roy's jaw hit the floor when two characters who were hinted towards being a part of the LGBTQ community entered the sewers and said, "Have you ever been down a manhole before?" After hearing this, we totally side with Roy. What were the writers thinking? We mean, come on, that's just ridiculous. So what did you guys think about these canceled Disney movies? Are there any you would have liked to see on the big screen? Let us know in the comment section, and don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to The Things for the latest Disney news. Thanks for watching, we'll catch you next time.